was dismissed as crazy conspiracy theory just over a decade ago has become, in this post-9/11 era, the all-too-familiar stuff of newspaper headlines and talking head reportage. What if this data, our emails, our phone calls, our credit card transactions, our social media posts, our cell phone GPS logs, and all of the hundreds of other pieces of data that are admittedly being collected on us each and every day, were being fed into a database so gargantuan it contains a digital version of every single person on the planet? And what if that database were being used by the Department of Defense to wargame various scenarios, from public reactions to natural disasters, to the likelihood of civil unrest in the wake of a declaration of martial law? Remarkably, this is precisely what is happening.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey everyone, welcome again to Canary Cry Radio. Thanks for tuning in this week. My name is Basil.
And I'm Gonz, and we're going to talk about the Sentient world simulation. And wow. We just actually heard about this from Tim Kilkenny, the co-host of Revelations Radio News. But essentially, what it is, and this is their definition of the Sentient world simulation, it's a continuously running, continually updated mirror model of the real world that can be used to predict and evaluate future events and courses of action. Sentient world simulation reacts to actual events that occur anywhere in the world and incorporates newly sensed data from the real world. So
essentially what's happening is everything that you do, phone calls, emails, GPS, social media, everything, going to an ATM, using a card, is very similar to what we talked about a long time ago with the Utah data center, where it's all being stored in just unimaginable large servers holding all this data. Well, what's happening now is all of this is going into a simulation. Now, stay with me and try to picture this. Everything you do is going into a computer, which is then creating a simulation, adding what everybody else is doing around you and in the country and essentially in the world, and it's creating a program, basically a mirror image of the planet with every single piece of data on a live action scale, tracking everybody. I mean, it's basically looking into a crystal ball and being able to look at anywhere on Earth and just see exactly what's happening down to where you are walking, like physically where I am walking with my cell phone.
Yeah, and this whole thing brings everything back to this concept of a Panopticon, and we've talked about this, and the Collins brothers, in their book, they talk about it in a book called The Scientific Dictatorship. But basically, a physical Panopticon it's sort of an institutional building that was actually this guy named Jeremy Bentham came up with the idea. And basically, I'm just going to read this Wikipedia description of it. It's the concept of the design is to allow a watchman to observe the Opticon, all Pan, inmates of an institution without their being able to tell whether or not they're being watched. So it's kind of the effects of that are basically that the people or prisoners or whoever is in the system become self-policed. They begin to change their behavior in a way that is socially acceptable, or right, what is being promoted as socially acceptable, and that just sounds like the mark of the beast all over the place. So that's that's kind of the point of this whole thing. But
right. Well, I mean, we've talked about this stuff before. This is nothing. I mean, this particular device is new to me. I mean, in a real world setting, we've seen this sort of stuff in all sorts of movies. I mean, even The Dark Knight had his little sonar thing that could see where everybody was at all times. But I mean, this is actually a thing that is now in use for, and I like this, they call it stakeholders.
Yeah.
They don't say, well, it's the government, they are doing this, or they don't say, oh, this specific organization is using this to track everybody. They call them stakeholders. So whoever is holding stake at the time. But So, I mean, what they're saying about this thing is that they're using it to study and simulate how a public reaction or a mass reaction to a disaster or to anything would really go down. And that's the part where they try to make it seem acceptable or like benign, but at the same time, it's like the most sinister thing I can think of.
Right. And the document that we're looking at is, it's called the Sentient World Simulation, but it's a white paper written by the Sentient World Simulation Advisory Committee. So this is like pretty much, and I think this document's from 2005, and we'll link to it obviously, but the concepts are all there. And if you read on some of the things that they plan to do, they list a bunch of stuff, and it gets really detailed.
It gives it incredible detail on how the whole thing works. And so you can take the time and read that. It gets a little confusing, especially a lot of the programs that they start mentioning if you're not familiar with them. But yeah, the whole idea around it is they can build this sort of digital copy of the world as it's happening in real time, and then present that digital world with a disaster and simulate or predict how a reaction would be, either regionally or nationally. For instance, sitting here right now, what I'm doing, I have my cell phone here on my computer. I'm totally on the grid. Now, somewhere in some building, there's a little digital version of me sitting with my computer and my cell phone. Now, what they could do at any moment is introduce a disaster to that little digital version of me, poor guy, and try to predict what I would do. And what they do essentially with all this is take all sorts of information, my Facebook likes and everything, everything that's being collected about me, all the websites I visit. I mean, there's quite the dossier of information that they have on everybody. Now, what they do is they use that, analyze it, and have your little mini me react to some sort of disaster. So, I mean, if you think about it, some extension of my sort of being that they have put together could be reacting to some, crazy disaster or government lockdown. And who knows what that little guy's doing that could be giving away what I might actually do in real life. That's the scary part. It's almost like I'm betraying myself right now by just the information I have that they're watching a little representation of me, go commando.
Well, I'm wondering I wonder if like to try to implement this sort of system, they would tell us, for example, I mean, I'm just totally being speculative here, but what if they tell us like, yeah, there are a group of elite people, they have a lot of power, but they'd rather do a digital simulation of a disaster rather than pull off like an earthquake, a tsunami, or, some kind of hurricane or something like that, which presumably they can do to some extent. It would be interesting if that's what happened, If they disclosed. Yeah, they disclosed it and said, yeah, okay, we're evil.
Like, hey, by the way, we did this simulation and you guys are totally screwed. So is that what you're talking about? Where they can
sort of
reveal what they're...
Not even that. No, I'm saying in the past they have done that. They would somehow like play the game of like, oh, we caught the bad guys. Like they would use this power to...
Are you talking in real life or in the simulation?
No, like in real life, to try to implement this onto everybody.
Implement what onto everybody?
The whole simulation.
So you mean, they run a simulation and then do it in real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the idea. So, essentially, and I don't know exactly what's going on with this thing. But I mean, for instance, they could run some sort of nuclear disaster simulation. And then they could look at, on all sorts of scales, all the way down from the individual, all the way up to, a massive scale of individuals and simulate how they would react to it. So, I mean, right now they could be running a simulation of, a nuclear disaster in Southern California, and they would be watching my little guy and Gonz's little guy run around with, like chickens with their head cuts off.
Yeah, and they actually, according to them, they tried to answer why we have to have this. And they basically said that, I'm just going to quote them here, "We have kinetic war game simulations that accurately predict the outcome of battles, but we do not have tools that accurately predict the outcome of peace or natural events, which often are proving to be more expensive in terms of lives and dollars than the war." So they're kind of trying to justify it like, look, we have these things for our battles in war to try to get an upper hand, but we don't have one for natural disasters or...
Well, I mean, if you think about it, I've been listening to a lot of stuff about Hurricane Katrina lately because of Hurricane Isaac that's sort of hanging around. But they were talking about how, Katrina caused $14 billion in damages, not to mention all the losses of the economy in the area and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, natural disasters are obviously very costly in lives and in dollars. But so now they're using this to try to sort of simulate. And I mean, that's great, I guess. I think they could bring me in and ask me to simulate how, people would react to a natural disaster. Normally it's running away from it. So, I mean, I think that's the easy part. The hard part, or the more complex part, I would say, would be, the types of things where they're running a simulation that has to do with alien disclosures or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I think that's definitely some possible scenarios there. But
it's great. They have like a crystal ball. A crystal ball it's almost is a crystal ball to just predict the future based on choices that they make to, disclose things or cause disasters. Or, I just read about, like the 20,000 commandos that are Russian commandos that are loose in America, and they can simulate what people would do in the case that these Russian commandos.
Well, I wonder. That's the thing I was trying to
activated or whatever.
Well, that's the thing I was trying to allude to earlier, was that how have they been using real life events to, I guess, not read the information, but okay, for the simulation to work, it would have to know something about reality, right?
Right, to start putting together some sort of reactive data.
Right, exactly. Like so like how much of it is being controlled now already? For example, like I said, with the earthquakes, tsunamis, stuff like that, or other things that are natural, quote unquote, natural disasters.
Got it. Yeah, no, exactly. And one thing that comes to mind is all the little diseases that keep breaking up. I call them little diseases, but they're so centralized that I could see how that would be a little information gathering project. Like hantavirus just broke out in like Yosemite. And so, that's a little, hantavirus is really gnarly. And there's been some people who have already died from it. And so, there's that. And then swine flu just showed itself in somewhere.
I almost feel like those kinds of stories and the little scares of the media there, those types of things are actually meant more for a distraction for the alternative media. We had this conversation sort of with Tim Kilkenny that you guys will hear in a few weeks. But
well, you think about even the really weird anomalies. I mean, what was it? There was one anomaly where this sludge started falling from the sky. I think it was in the Midwest.
I remember that.
Right, and this sludge started falling from the sky. And, it was obviously really bizarre. And they came up with all sorts of explanations from, waste from airplanes to, whatever. But there's like human DNA within this sludge, which is totally bizarre happening.
Yeah, it's not cool.
Well, and I mean, who knows what it is. But at the same time, we could speculate what that is, or we could say like it's aliens, or we could do all this stuff, when in reality it's very possible that it was just a little data gathering experiment.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
to be fed into the system.
Yeah, because the algorithms would have to reflect reality, and they know that. And this gets really close to the sort of conversation of artificial intelligence too, because essentially this system, this sentient world simulation machine, is effectively going to, well, on obvious levels, it's like the all-seeing eye. It's like Big Brother. Everybody's locked in, but to be able to make moral decisions about people's actions, that's where it's really dangerous. Because somebody that's in control of this thing and really has just something sinister or some grudge against people or something, and they had access to this information over this database, how easy would it be to find them, to track them, stalk them digitally?
Well, and predict what they're going to do given any sort of circumstances.
Right, looking at the patterns of their behavior and somehow affecting it to... it's kind of like Groundhog Day, the movie, where you...
Right, and they get to replay it over and over until they finally find a simulation that comes out in their favor.
Right, and I mean, think about the kind of real-life problems that would cause, though, because, okay, this person probably, let's say this person's trying to create a situation to carry out a plan, and that plan doesn't really carry out in reality as the simulation told him. And so what happens then, These people are going to lose their minds.
Right. Well, I mean, you could put that on any sort of scale. I mean, it's a tool where whoever's using it, will just call them the powers that be, using this tool. Now, they have a goal, and they have an idea of what they want to do to get this goal. Well, now, in the olden days of manipulating the masses and causing mass mind control, and the olden days where they would just have to try to do something sinister, in the days of 2001 when they could just, well, let's do 9/11 and hope something happens. Well, now they can simulate thousands of new disasters and work with them and change them and tweak them and find the one that gets the exact reaction that they want. It's just a whole new tool for manipulation and basically mind control or yeah.
It's social control. It's starting with the individual mind, but that's it's interesting because this is really even though it is a virtual system, it's sort of the culmination of all the stuff that we've heard about with internet tracking, and it seems like something that has sort of its tentacles in the idea of a singularity.
It also brings in an aspect of the whole precog, pre-policing, pre-crime,
crime prevention,
all that stuff. I mean, it's all sort of part of the same thing. And now, I doubt that hokey pokey police departments are having access to this sort of thing, but who knows? At some time, they might be able to do something like that.
Well, I think at some level they're going to be able to have, local or regional sort of data access or something.
Oh, someday I'm sure, if not right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's easy to. The thing is, if they want to find you today, if you have a cell phone, they can find you. Like if you disappear or something, but you keep your cell phone with you, they're going to find you, and the other tie-in with like transhumanism is the potential of this simulation world becoming more integrated with reality, with our virtual experiences,
right?
Of, literally going into it and experiencing what it would be like to die or something, like all sorts of craziness when we bring it back to some of the things we've talked about in the past with brain interfacing and all that stuff. It's sort of like the culmination point of all of it.
Well, and just to sort of build on top of some sort of speculation, a long time ago we talked about the capturing of your brain waves into your brain patterns into an electronic device, and theoretically that could be called capturing you, because I mean we are If we separate some sort of separate spirit, the brain waves are what make your personality and brain patterns and things like that make you you. Well, if at one point they're able to just collect those willy-nilly, then they could even feed those into the simulation. And then not only do they just have this thing where they sort of just build you from the websites that you visit and where you go with your cell phone and things like that. Well, now then they have the actual brain patterns, that they've scanned from you or done something or other. And now they literally have a little digital copy of you, with your personality and everything that could, be used to do all sorts of other stuff. But I think the big realization with this project is that the digital world is becoming less and less separated from the physical world.
Yeah, we see that. Yeah, we happen to have that sort of culture already brewing. Social media right now is a really big thing. And obviously, a lot of people are on it. The typical stories, the examples you hear about people trying to get a job, and then their bosses look at their Facebook page and they see him with a red cup and doing a keg stand or whatever, and they have to, they don't get the job. That sort of,
or they get a huge high five,
right. depending on where they're working, I guess. But yeah, that whole concept of like, oh, okay, let's see who you really are by looking at the internet. Looking at what you've done with the internet,
right?
It's not reality, but it's painting it as reality, and that's the thing that's really sort of scary, because we're losing who we are in exchange for this virtual me. It's just sort of.
Even aside from that, I'm seeing less and less of a disconnection. I'm seeing even more of a correlation between a digital self and a physical self. Maybe not on the level of Facebook, because, I think Facebook is a good example of what we would call a traditional worldview of, separation between digital self and physical self,
right?
Because you're talking about there's you, and then there's your Facebook you, which is way cooler and loves kayaking and mountain bike, even though you're just kind of sit in your garage and do podcasts all day. But so there's that's sort of the traditional, like early millennial version of a digital self. Now, what I'm kind of seeing coming into fruition here is just the distance between reality of your digital self and physical self to some people, to the people who have who are in charge. The physical self is lining up better with the digital self. Now the digital self is not necessarily an extension of your ego, where you get to sort of put what you want out there and show people on your MySpace and your Facebook, but now it is they're gathering information of your digital personality without you knowing it.
Yeah.
And so because you don't know it's happening, it's more honest. You know?
And also I think it's also the fact that now that channel has been opened up in the last, 20 years, the internet has become sort of ingrained into humanity's conscious being, or whatever you want to call it. It's part of everyday life for a lot of people, not everybody in the world, obviously, but
you can't imagine life without internet.
Right. So
America, at least.
At the beginning, it was sort of like, just again, like you said, like an extension of you, like, oh, this is sort of, the part of me that's not really me, but this is the image.
And that was the beautiful thing about the internet.
Right. But like you said, it's almost like now the tides have turned in a way, and now the other side, the virtual side, and those who have control of it are saying, look, we can actually shape who you are now. We are the dictators of your culture, of your what you value as a society, and things like that. And through advertising, through media, through all sorts of means, I think they've been able to achieve that, and that's why that disconnect is not there anymore. It's almost like if you trust somebody to, take $100,000 and, they come back with it and it's more, next time you give him, $1 million, let's say, I'm just using it as an example. And then they come back and they make it $2 million and you're like, man, this is awesome. So you give him 10 million bucks to like, double it because he's done it every time. And then he runs away with the money, It's sort of like that. That's a really bad analogy.
Yeah. I follow the analogy. What are we talking about again? You mean we've just been trusting them with so much of our information.
I'm just saying the way we have opened ourselves up to the internet.
Right.
Like we didn't really we weren't really careful with it. It was just more like, oh yeah, let's just do it, and everyone's gonna do it, and everyone has the Facebook now, and now it's and then it's opened us up to their ability to like feed into what we ought to be or ought to think. And
well, I think Facebook is just Facebook in itself and the evolution of Facebook. Now, I know Facebook is kind of new to you, Gonz, but I mean, for those of us who had Facebook back in 2007,
I actually had I still do. That's deactivated right now. I had a Facebook account from like very, very early when it first came out.
Okay, so then when it first came out, it was a completely different monster than it is today.
It was just for college, and
Well, not even that. I mean, it was just there were no likes, there were no like all this stuff. They didn't track everything you did. They didn't advertise to you depending on what words you used in posts and things like that. It was a lot less intense, and so people weren't so wary of putting information on there. I mean, granted, this is still 2007, but I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago. But the difference between 2007 and the internet practices of 2012 are humongous.
Yeah, the cultural gap between what's going on, what's happening.
Right.
Yeah, it's very big.
By the time human beings had their first 12-second flight with the Wright brothers until we were on the moon was about 60 years.
Yeah.
Now we go, 2007, we have, we're putting personal information in the form of social media. But now, 5 years later, it's completely changed. The game has changed. And so people are actually legitimately weary. People who are so fine putting, I like books. Well, now that I like books is on Facebook, they will gather so much. I mean, they take I like books and then they connect that with all these websites that you're going to, and he looks at conspiracies.
All the books you bought, yeah.
Well, yeah, and look at his Amazon stuff, and now we have all this information. Well, let's see. Knowing that he's read this books, we can all feed that into his little mini-me, and that'll just be an aspect of data that tells us what happens when the Russians take over or something like that.
Yeah, and also just when you were saying all that stuff, it made me think about the mindset of these people that are really trying to create this, and obviously the spirit behind it is, as we all know, is one that is evil and is iniquity. But I'm just trying to picture like me sitting there in this information or this sort of data, this massive ability to navigate through this thick, ball of data of everything that you'd ever want to know about anybody. First off, is sort of creepy to me because that's a lot of power for one, but number two, it's completely changing the human being into a number. I mean, we already know that, the Social Security and all this stuff, that has already sort of started, but this is like the next phase, it seems like. It may not be the ultimate outcome, but it's sort of like the step of like, okay, now we went through that phase of, everyone getting Social Security cards, or now it's iPhones or whatever it is. And this next thing is like this digital print of yourself.
Right, exactly. Well, now I'm not just a Social Security number. Now I'm an actual little section of a million lines of code inside of this simulation, and that's everything that is me. And it actually brings something up. You mentioned about the actual people who are implementing this thing, and this is something that I kind of been wanting to talk about a little bit because I'll talk to people about the one world government, new world order, and all this stuff, and how it's all a big plan. And the biggest thing is like, yeah, I get that this is happening. I get that eugenics is happening. I get that, this other terrible thing is happening. But I don't necessarily think that they're all planned by, one guy or one, table of old men. And I'm willing to let go of that. But I am going to say, and the reason I bring this up is because, whoever created this SWS, this simulated sentient world simulation, may not, I think it's irrelevant, but may not be, part of the Illuminati. Or,
No.
I don't think iPhones were created for the Illuminati to do something. So this is all stuff that's, once it exists, then it gets used used and abused. Now, what I do believe is that even though it may not originate from, a council of old men, I do, ruling the world, I do believe that the spirit that eventually, I believe it's all underneath the spirit, a spiritual entity who has the order to bring stuff like this about, so it can be used for ultimately the enemy's agenda.
Well, it's very interesting you bring that up, because in the book that the guy who started Wired magazine, the book he wrote that we've quoted before, he mentions how there's this sort of natural thing that occurs with inventions or discoveries, and he lists a bunch of stuff where some major, pretty major breakthroughs where people have, multiple people have discovered the same thing, but one gets the face, one person becomes like sort of the champion of that discovery. And so his point was that inevitably, we come to discover things, and it's more of a communal thing than an individual thing of somebody, sitting in their basement coming up with something, because most inventions, if you think about it, are not, and this is even scientifically true, that it's not like you sit there and plan to build, let's say a light bulb or something. It's like somehow they figured out the effects of, certain things, and then they used the effect and implemented it into a usable thing, right?
First comes the concept, and then comes the invention.
Right. But the concept can't arrive unless there's an effect that they see. There's some sort of action there that can be harnessed to use.
Electricity heats up filaments. Oh, let's make a filament inside of a bulb and make it a light bulb.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's kind of the idea here. And again, that reflects perfectly this idea of a spiritual sort of ramping up, or a wave that's really starting to pick up. And ultimately, I think that is the thing that's going to swallow everything in, and
right. And I mean, whoever sort of came up with the idea of creating a virtual world that's a mirror image of the world happening around us in real time, they may completely have come up with it with good intentions. Maybe they really do just want to study how to better react when an earthquake hits so we can save the most lives. I mean, knowing what we know it's not going to be used for that in the long run. But at the same time, I could totally see it being inspired by, a conniving, fallen angel or spirit or agent of the enemy who, in order to bring about the final plan, we need to have this mirror image of the world so it can be used for evil. You know what I mean?
And just, going back into some of the details, which to me just blows my mind sometimes, is, where should I start with this? Have you heard of the Information Awareness Office, Basil?
Oh, no.
You have not. Okay. Look it up. Look at the logo. It was defunded by the Congress in 2003, but the office says that it continued to be funded and run under various names afterwards. So post 2003, and just for the audience here, the Information Awareness Office was this thing created by DARPA in 2002, but their logo is...
Holy crap.
Yeah, well, Derek Gilbert has pointed this out in his talks, but literally it's the all-seeing eye on the pyramid, like glowing his radiance upon the face of the earth. So, I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing. There was a joke by some guy who said that, the only problem with the Information Awareness Office is it was too honest.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. I mean, looking at this, it almost looks fake. Yeah, like it almost looks like it's from a bad science fiction
movie. It's like the Illuminati PR was like, oh man, I wish we could take that one back. It was a little too far.
Somebody who's definitely lost their job over that one. Wow. But, no, we should post that in the show notes.
Yeah, well,
hilarious.
A lot of people know about that and the ramifications of that. That's kind of where it all started. But thinking about how this can really become even more scary as far as like your digital print, because my first thought was like, okay, well, they'll know where I've been. Yes, that's creepy, but they know what sort of things I like or whatever, or what stuff I'm into by looking at the internet and my trail of the browser history or whatever. And they can kind of piece together things, but they can't really know what I'm thinking,
I know. Yeah.
And so there's a part of it there, but also there's this idea of biosurveillance, and we've heard about some of the technologies coming out that measure, biological, movements of your body cells and I don't know.
Biological signatures.
Signatures, sort of. Right. So once that stuff is in place, I mean, think about how much data, like literally it's going to be a mirror copy of you, not just the actions that you do, but your number of heartbeats in a lifetime, being measured and all sorts of craziness, that's sort of the extreme, but I think that's where it's all headed. And that's where it kind of ties into, again, the concept of of transhumanism and this idea of merging with machine. Well, yeah, merge with the machine, but what is the machine that it's merging to? And it's possible that this sort of system, this sort of virtual world or universe or whatever you want to call it, is sort of going to be this playground of,
Well, one thing that I find fascinating is, I mean, this is probably the last generation that will be able to put down their cell phone, walk away from the computer, and walk away and not be tracked. Where your physical body, no matter what we have going on with the tracking of whatever, we have our physical body that can still disappear.
To some extent. I mean, they can satellite track you at,
No. Well, if they're looking at you, I mean, if they're
looking for you.
But I mean, if I were to set everything down right now and just walk away, with the exception of showing up on a few security cameras, I and my physical body can just leave.
Yeah.
Okay. And I believe that I'm probably the last generation to be in that sort of reality. I mean, my kids, implants will probably be a normal thing. I mean, instead of vaccines, they'll probably be vaccination implants that slowly, and there's all these detection nodes that you can put in your body now to detect diseases and all these things that they're talking about implementing, within the next 10, 15 years. And, I mean, once those things are in your body, then you're trackable, and Lord knows they're going to make you trackable. They're not going to put something in your body and not make you trackable. It's just how it is. You can't buy you can hardly buy anything without it being trackable now. I mean, there's even RID chips inside things like boxes of cereal and stuff now, because stores can track inventory easier than barcodes. You know what I mean? And so everything is becoming trackable. And, soon it's going to be our bodies. And, I'm kind of stoked that, I slipped in before that became a reality. Now, who knows what's going to happen in the future? And,
right.
So I mean, there's all of that. But I mean, at least right now we have that.
Yeah. Goes right back to all the stuff that we've talked about in the past with biblical prophecy, with why this whole thing just makes a whole lot more sense if you understand some of the ramifications of Bible prophecy. And, these aren't traditional views of prophecy that we're sort of coming up with. And I think it's not necessarily that we're right or they were wrong, or it's none of that, because I think with each generation, there's going to be a deeper or different understanding of how prophecy might play out. And prophecy is one of those topics that it's pure speculation. It's based on the text, and we have a general idea of what's going to happen, but we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. So, but it is important to understand that our future is going to become, again, very strange. It's going to be a very different place. And just a year from now, I think we're going to be in a completely different place where, something else is sort of the way to do things. And culturally, it's just going to keep changing. And that's the thing that's really strange, is we've heard so much about, like, America's a melting pot of cultures and stuff like that. Well, it's sort of destroyed. There is no culture inherent, and so I think that's also been shaped by the internet and the control of media and all that stuff put together. But
one thing I liked what you're saying was the prophecy thing, and especially with what we're talking about now. And in the past, prophecy is sort of like, well, it is written and so it shall be. Like, the beast shall blah blah blah, and you will see. You're not going to be able to buy or sell if you don't have the mark of the beast. Well, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you're looking forward. You're saying, okay, I see this prophecy. What could this be? Well, today, we don't even do that. We more deconstruct it, where we say, wow, here's this thing where, it's going to be an implant and you can't buy or sell anything without it. Let's look back at the prophecy. Yep. It looks pretty similar. Yeah. We should probably watch out for that. So we're in a time now where we're seeing reality, and we are able to look back and see that it had been prophesied. Instead of having to look forward and sort of speculate on when and how the prophecy will be fulfilled.
And that's a good point too, because I think a lot of people, especially those who are very skeptical of prophetic writings or prophecy or of any kind, they tend to think, I think, almost too linearly or dare I say, too logically about the whole thing about prophecy, because they'll often say, like, well, what if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or they always look at it as like, okay, a single event is predicted, and until that single event occurs, the prophecy isn't fulfilled, and it's sort of like this very static equation almost that has to make sense for them to even consider the idea or possibility of prophecies existing and being real, which obviously, certainly Basil and I believe is based on the Holy Bible, the Scriptures. And so there's a concept that, it's an event predicted, an event fulfilled. Well, I think with biblical prophecy especially, which is kind of what I'm starting to see, is that it's more of like a living thing. It sort of grows, and it's not like an event. And obviously the mark of the beast is written in a form of like an event, like, there will be a time sort of thing, but if you really sort of think about it, it's like, in order for that to be fulfilled, countless number of events have to occur very strategically or systematically to lead up to a point where people are accepting some sort of mark that they need to buy, sell, trade, and all this stuff. So essentially we are living in the times of prophecy being fulfilled. And it's my thought that prophecy has never been like, it's never totally been a future event. If you look at the continuum of time, it's always sort of been one thing, that's been predicted, but every development is leading towards that fulfillment. So I don't know. I guess just open up your mind to different ways to look at prophecy, because I think people tend to get stuck on a very linear fashion of it.
Well, I think it happens in degrees.
Yeah.
Is, I think, a big thing. Right now, something that we could describe as the beast exists. It's there. It exists. It's not even a thing to talk about. It's just there. The technology is there.
Yeah.
But now I think, and then some people would be like, the prophecy is fulfilled. Here it is. It exists. Well, I don't think that's quite it. I think now we're moving into a time where we're being desensitized and we're being manipulated and we're being lied to until eventually in a few years, the whole beast thing or, whatever it is will be so sneaky and so subtle that, like the Bible says, even the believers are going to be deceived. And that's, just another degree of the whole prophecy, where now it's happening so subtly that even a lot of people aren't able to pick it out and avoid it, which is a huge reason why we started the show. Yeah,
and the types of questions that we always try to tackle is like, okay, when is enough enough? You talked about how right now you think you're the last generation that can just drop the computer and just walk away. Well, I've thought about this, and if the day comes where there's like a solar ray or something that hits the Earth and all of our electronics go out or something, there's a level of I actually did a sentient world simulation in my head of what that would be like.
Wow.
Yeah, my brain is the prototype of the data center for this project. But all right, so if there was like a solar flare or something that hit the side of the Earth, and all of our electronics fried, we didn't have any electronics, I would go into withdrawal for a little bit. Like, I don't know how long it would last, but there would be a moment of like anxiety of like, I need to get on the internet. Right. I know I would have that. So it's sort of, it's strange. And again, I think this is partly why, and I'm not trying to be dogmatic or anything here, but I think this is why God asked people or commanded people basically to observe the Sabbath, like a day off, right? The day of rest. It just totally makes sense in this sort of world we're living in. And I think that is something that we should be embracing a lot more nowadays, because things are moving so quickly and so much stuff is happening.
Absolutely.
A day of rest is essential for everyone.
And the thing I love about that commandment and all the commandments is it's not arbitrary. We need to be holding a Sabbath right now, because without it, our bodies are literally dying. The stress of today's work environment, the stress of everything today, if you're not giving your body rest, stress is the biggest killer, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Basil, is prescribing a day off. Because no, seriously, and even science, even outside of anything that I have to say, even outside of the Bible, laboratory mice put under stress die 100 times sooner than rats who are not under the same kind of stress.
Yeah.
And so the thing I love about all the commandments is that it's not God saying do this because this is an arbitrary
it pleases me.
Right. It's not an arbitrary condition to receive my love. It's, do this. I'm telling you to do it because it's good for you. Trust me. Please just do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's just number one, how I like to look at all of it. And it all makes sense when you start to look at all of his commandments that way. But I think the Sabbath is especially one that if anybody is listening and you're not taking a Sabbath off, even if it's not Saturday or Sunday, you need to be taking a day off and devoting it to, sitting and, preferably spending time with God on that day.
Yeah.
And just resting your physical body, because God cares about your physical body just as much as everything else.
Yeah, it's the temple.
It's a temple.
Temple of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just quote a couple more things here and just sort of comment on them. But this is, again, back from the document that the Sentient World Simulation people wrote up. And so basically this is the main objective. It's develop a sentient world simulation consisting of theoretically correct, behaviorally accurate, and numerically realistic computational models of behavior for individuals, groups, organizations, and institutions in order to 1. Construct political, military, social, economic, information, and infrastructure elements of different communities, cities, states, countries, and international systems. And number 2, develop models for interventions such as diplomatic, information, military, economic, and law enforcement. And so basically it's saying this simulation is going to be able to assess and address and measure and, again, looking at the future of how things would, or how people would react, or how communities or cities or states would react. I mean, it's sort of like that quintessential evil character of a movie, that has sort of like a screen with like the entire world in front of it. And like, he has the ability to like see anybody and, track anything and do whatever. It's sort of that kind of dark power, that's behind it.
Right. Well, yeah, I think one interesting thing about it is the just the detail into which they go in. I mean, it's military, it's economic, it's situational, it's groups, it's individuals, it's organizations, it's everything, So it just shows the amount of detail and the amount of dynamic information that they're able to work with. It's not simply seeing what happens when you drop a disease on a population. It's, you look at this population and you say, okay, now we have individuals doing this, we have the Occupy organization doing this, we have the people as a whole doing this, and so there's so many there's such a wide range of data that it gives so many possibilities. I mean, it's just so complicated.
Yeah. And to be able to navigate through that, and just the fact that traceable line from the very top to you is becoming more and more defined and clear, it's just sort of creepy. And just one more quote, and it's this, you sort of addressed this earlier, Basil, but it's the quote that he got this information from, but it says, the thing that they say they must develop and why they have to do it is for live historical and synthetic data from sensors, instruments, and transaction data available to stakeholders in a seamless manner. And yeah, you had mentioned it earlier, but why is it only available to the stakeholders, and why in a seamless manner? Like, what does that mean?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, stakeholders, that's it right there. They just gave it away. It's not about the government. It's not about a certain organization. It's whoever's holding the stakes in that certain situation, which almost leads to the assumption with that sort of vague vocabulary. Oh, doggy. I mean, we make a big deal about this with legislation and stuff because it's very important to be specific. Well, in this sort of situation, that is not very specific language.
No.
So stakeholders could be who? It could be a corporate, could be a corporation that pays $1 million to run this simulation.
Right.
It could be, a foreign government to run another simulation to, it's not like,
yeah, and
it doesn't have a foundational purpose, which is the most bizarre part about the whole thing. It's not like the government has created this system in order to help the people. It's like the stakeholders who each pay $14 billion to get their own simulation run. It's just so vague as to who it's available to.
Yeah, well, totally. And again, it brings us back to everything we've talked about in the past. And we're going to keep preaching it because I think it's a topic that's important for people to consider and think about and discuss. And certainly, think about the ramifications. Think about what you would do. I think that, again, I've mentioned this several times as well, but I think there will be a point where I think the spirit is going to move in people that know what's going on, and they're just going to drop whatever is going on,
Right.
And it's just going to be one of those things where it's like, okay, we'll go live in the woods or whatever, but that's,
Right.
that's what we're supposed to do. So,
yeah, well, there you go. And all that being said, once again, Dr. Basil suggests that you all start taking a Sabbath, put down the computer, put down the cell phone for a little while, go outside, read your Bible, rest your bodies. And with that being said, thanks again for tuning in to Canary Cry Radio this week. Make sure to tune in again. And as always, think outside the cage.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. The show notes for this episode and many others are available at canarycryradio.com. Make sure to connect and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/canarycryradio. Follow us on Twitter at Canary Cry Radio. If you would like to share the show in video format, you can find us on YouTube by searching Canary Cry Radio. Review us on iTunes with 5 stars and give us a thumbs up on stumbleupon.com. We would like to thank those of you who have given us your support, prayers, and donations. If you would like to join us and support Canary Cry Radio financially, you could do so by visiting canarycryradio.com and clicking the support tab. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, remember to think outside the cage.